And welcome to today's segment of The Power of Money. I'm your host, Michelle Graves, affectionately known for over the last 30 years, how can you believe time flies, as the Money Lady. And again, my commitment to my viewers, my faithful viewers, for your loyalty and your years of watching my programs, is to bring you information and people that can help you to get through this life better, financially that is. And with a focus on education and empowerment so that you and your families can live through this experience called life. And believe me, there's no smooth road. I don't care who you are, it's just what it is. So today, without a lot of prelude, I'm going to introduce my guest. He's been on in the past. We've been friends for over 30 years. He is, in my opinion, one of the sharpest legal minds in the United States. And I'm always honored to have him on as my guest and to share his perspective on his areas of expertise and really what he does. He focuses on consumers and that are in trouble. I'm not talking about criminal. He does not do criminal law, but he is involved in the world of finance and banking and debt and all of those things. So, and that's very powerful today because Americans are into debt up the wazoo. They are. They don't have any money. They don't have any money because it's all going out to pay interest on debt. So again, he's here to talk about just some of the things that you need to be aware of from his vantage point as an attorney specializing in debt resolution issues. And so stay put. My guest today for the next hour is attorney at law Edward Garrett with offices in Cincinnati, Ohio, but practicing in Ohio and Kentucky. How are you today?
Very well, Michelle. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. Where do we want to begin? Why don't you tell my viewers how you got into this field?
Well, it goes back quite a ways. But originally, I was in the banking industry myself. I was with a large thrift association that I joined in Hamilton County, Ohio, back in the late 70s, just as I had exited college. And that organization grew and grew as a result of a very strong economy and a series of mergers. And during the first few years that I was with that Savings and Loan Association, I went to law school at Chase over in Northern Kentucky, earned my law degree, exited, became general counsel for that firm, and then basically continued for about 10 years until that organization was purchased by a large national bank, at which time I was given the opportunity to exit with a very friendly parachute and just start my own private practice. And because of my banking background, I found that I should probably be practicing along the lines of something in the financial industry. And I began with a title company that I operated for a number of years during the real estate boom. But more interestingly, I established a credit services organization by the name of Credit Improvers, which has grown into a national organization where we work with people having problem credit reports. And the natural outgrowth from that business has been that I've come to have contact with a lot of people who have very serious problems with debt. Okay. And in particular, they are oftentimes the subject of lawsuits that are being filed in collection by credit card companies or large banks. And I sort of have developed over the past 5 to 7 years a niche in my practice where basically I defend these people against these claims, finding out, much to our delight, that the banks and the credit card companies are in no way prepared to win their case if you contest their lawsuit. And I have very successfully, with an extraordinary success rate, been able to defend consumers against these monster banks and credit card companies that are bringing claims that they simply can't prove in court.
That's very interesting. Typically, explain for the benefit of my viewers, because obviously I come out of banking and I understand the charade. It's pathetic, but Explain what typically happens when a customer or a consumer comes to your office.
Okay, the consumer typically comes to me when they are either receiving strong collection notices or they have actually been served process in a lawsuit in a collection matter. So it's very late in the process. Now, prior to coming to my office, the client has typically done all kinds of things that seem to be remedies, but they're not. I mean, they've tried to work with collectors, they've told the truth, they've lied, they've entered into and out of restructuring agreements, they paid exhaustive penalties and interest rates. Then perhaps they've gone to payday loan companies to try to salvage something, which just frustrates the problem. Or they've gone into some type of debt negotiation or debt settlement company that is by its nature not even designed to succeed. So in essence, the client is in a lawsuit when they come to me. Capital One Bank, for example,
They're notorious.
has filed a law. Everybody in the
notorious.
country with poor credit
Yeah.
seems to have a Capital One
Right. Well,
charge
that's
card.
that seems to be their market with secured credit cards as well as high interest rate credit cards.
Right.
That seems to be their niche.
And the whole thing, just from a perspective on consumerism, the underlying problem to all of this is that the American public, because of a lack of income, because of a society that constantly puts a carrot on a string in front of them, almost without exception, spend more money than they earn.
Yep.
And credit cards continuously advertise in a very concerted effort to try to identify these individuals, to make it appear that they can live beyond their means and make credit ridiculously available to them. So much that people oftentimes will have unsecured debt, that is credit card debt, that exceeds their annual income. And if you just stop for a moment and realize that most of these credit card accounts, before you account for fees themselves, just on a straight interest rate basis, are around 25%. Now,
Woo-wee.
right, and
Woo.
if you think about that for a moment, and I know you're an old-time
Yeah.
finance person, the old rule of 72 applies.
Right.
And in essence, the rule of 72, for those of you who weren't in banking back in the 70s, you can take any number, namely an interest rate, and divide it into the number 72. And that product will tell you how long it takes to double a principal investment. So for example, and just rounding it off, if you're at 25%, if you borrow $1,000 at 25%, in 3 years you owe $2,000.
Can we stop? Because, can we zoom in, please? This is why I need you to listen to this man. Because America, our country is drowning in debt, but they can print money. You can't. So it's a ruse. You're not going to win. You're going to lose. You're going to lose big time. Continue.
Okay, now, using that example of how extraordinarily profitable these usurious rates are that are charged by credit card companies actually leads to what is the solution that I've experienced for very many of my clients. Again, dealing with the psychology of an ordinary consumer, when a large bank such as Capital One files a lawsuit against Mary Doe is scared to death.
Yeah.
She has no idea what her legal rights are. She has no idea what the legal obligation of the plaintiff, Capital One, is. And she thinks that by simply dodging the delivery of the service of process, that she's somehow doing herself a favor. The bank is counting on that to happen. And they would just as soon drag their feet, collect a judgment, and continue to calculate exhaustive interest rates by a judgment by any means possible obtained from this individual.
So may I ask you not to interrupt, but because they do get judgments. All you got to do is look at the downtown records. Capital One and a group of them filed judgments because people don't show up.
That's exactly right. And
They
that's what the
don't show
bank
up.
hopes occurs. See, in Ohio, when you are served in a lawsuit, you have 28 days to file an answer, set up your defense, schedule trial, or fail to respond. Now, if you fail to respond at the end of that 28-day period, the other side can file what's known as a default judgment motion, where basically they come before the court and they say, "Dear judge, we attempted to bring this individual into court. They didn't bother to reply. Please, judge, give us our judgment." The judge will sign it. And the judgment goes into effect for the full amount as demanded. There's no opposition, there's no negotiation, there's no mediation with regard to the amount, and this becomes a enforceable obligation against the consumer, and there's really nothing effectively that they can do about this.
At that time.
At that time.
At that time, okay.
Now, as a result of the judgment, they are then subject to an attachment. And attachments typically come one of two ways. Either it's a garnishment against the account where they know you're doing business. So if you were writing certain payment checks over the history of an account through Fifth Third Bank, they're going to serve a garnishment on your Fifth Third Bank account, and whatever money's sitting in that account, they're going to get.
Get it.
And there's nothing you can do about it. The other way that they do it is a garnishment against your earnings. And again, they have their application in file, and that application probably indicates where you work. So on next payday, you can anticipate that your employer is going to be taking money out of your paycheck to satisfy this judgment. And to compound that problem, not only are they going to be taking the judgment, but each time they take the judgment, they are, one, going to add additional charges, interest, and fees to that amount. And number two, they're going to really frustrate your employer, and in all likelihood, in many places of employment, you're going to lose your job.
I know that to be true because I've heard too many accounts of exactly that happening, which is why, truthfully, Ed, when people tell me if they're not embarrassed, because the thing about it that I have found is that people are so ashamed of the circumstances that they have found themselves in. But as I share with people, if you are in the banking industry, you're dealing in an industry that is completely and totally predatory. On a good day, it's about making money. And if you went for the bait, whether it's through good slick sales ad and direct mail pieces, whatever, you went for the bait, you incurred the debt, then the bank's position is, and I was trained this way, the bank's position is you made the debt, pay it. But as you pointed out, they can't pay it. There's no way they could pay it. It's just like children in a candy store. Okay, I want to buy this, I want to buy that, but they can't pay the debt. And before we get self-righteous and say, well, you should have thought about that before you did it, I tell people on a macro scale, well, you need to tell the United States government that. Because you're talking about kids in the candy store. We are so leveraged out on our debt as a nation that it's hard to sell the case that consumers can get by with it.
Right. Now, the example that I've just brought out is an example of someone who runs away from the lawsuit.
Okay.
And I will tell you, if you pick up nothing else from this program today, don't ever do that. The alternative is to answer in that lawsuit. Now, when you answer within your 28 days in Ohio, you can set up what are known as affirmative defenses. And that basically you should have an attorney in this process, and I certainly am available for these types of cases. But in essence, you set up certain well-established defenses to what in essence is a contract suit. And these are statute of frauds, absence of writing, laches, all kinds of very technical defenses that are built in. But in doing this, what you are triggering is a basic rule of law. And that rule of law is if plaintiff has a claim against you, in court they must prove by a preponderance of evidence that they have an enforceable and definable claim. And I'm here to say that in the vast majority of these collection cases, the plaintiff cannot do that.
So they can't prove the debt.
Exactly right.
Okay.
And the reason that they can't prove this debt is because there are so many people that simply run away from these lawsuits that, as an industry, credit card companies and large commercial banks have found that it is more cost effective to not keep records than it is to lose a case once in a while. So when a client comes into my office with one of these cases, I handle each of them very much the same way. I file an answer, and I file something which is called a discovery request. The rules of procedure provide that both sides have to have open exchange of all of the information that they have with regard to a civil proceeding. So basically, I send out a request pursuant to these rules, and I ask the plaintiff, Capital One Bank, for example, to provide me with copies of everything. Okay. Give me a copy of the agreement. You say we have a contract, show me that contract. You say my client borrowed X number of dollars over the past 10 years, show me the receipts, show me the statements, show me the history, show me the accounting. Well, invariably what will happen is I'll get some documents back, and I'll have some bank representative's affidavit attached to these documents, and they don't prove anything. There are tremendous holes in the numbers of documents, and there are just absolutely ludicrous documents that are included within that file that purport to be the agreements and the evidence to which I'm entitled.
So do you run into situations where a bank can provide the original documentation on a contract for credit? Do you run into that often?
Once in a while.
Once in a while.
Let me say perhaps once in every 100 instances.
You're kidding.
It's just insanely.
It's just like, you gotta be kidding. How are you gonna bring a suit and you don't have a contract?
See, remember, they bring the suit with the hope that they never wind up in court.
Oh, because you will do a no-show.
Exactly right.
Oh my God.
But if you do show up in court, then they have to prove their case.
Okay.
And that's going to give you one of two results in most cases. It is going to either result in you prevailing by proving to the court that they cannot prove their case at trial, or prior to the trial, it's going to give a tremendous incentive to the plaintiff bank to negotiate a discounted settlement. They have to pay their attorney, they have to fly people all over the country to testify, their depositions, all kinds of things that get tremendously expensive. And if you have a lawyer that sounds as if he knows what he's talking about, they'll want to settle that case.
I'm sure
usually
they
for
would.
pennies on the dollar.
I'm sure.
So again, if you're faced with a $30,000 collection account and there's a probability of settling that for 10, 15 cents on the dollar.
Oh, I'll do that.
You're going to be very happy that you're defending that case.
Yeah, yeah. Well, why is it, do you think that the average consumer is so intimidated by the process that the thought of retaining legal counsel, is just the response I get is, oh, I can't afford it. I can't, I'm barely making bills, and now this. And now you're telling me to contact a legal counsel to make sure I'm represented before those 28 days.
Well, in a typical case that I see a lot of down in Hamilton County, we're talking about filing an answer, setting up discovery, maybe having a hearing or two. And even if you go to trial on one of these, if I bill at my hourly rate of $300 per hour, I might have 10 hours in this case.
Okay.
So, on the top end, I'm looking at $3,000 as my expenses for being in the case.
Right.
And again, many of these are $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 cases. Would you rather pay $3,000 or $35,000? I think it's a real easy hit. And that's ignoring the fact that you're actually protecting your legal rights.
Right. Does it, and I shouldn't ask, well, I am going to ask you, can a person realistically represent themselves?
Well, as a lawyer, I learned a long time ago that people have varying degrees of knowledge. And I'm not going to be the person to tell someone to go into a court pro se
yeah.
and try to understand, because the other side has a lawyer. And there are some very odd things with regard to evidence and admissibility and process that unless you're an attorney, you don't know what those rules are. In point of fact, half the people in the courthouse that are lawyers don't understand them fully. And I've seen judges on the bench that don't seem to understand evidentiary rules.
That's
so, but in a very small case, I can certainly see where someone's reluctant to spend a lot of money defending the claim. But the first couple of steps of what I'm recommending, that is having having an attorney file an answer and set up discovery, will at least get you in the negotiating mode. So even if you don't want to pay all the fees that it takes to prove or to defend your claim through the trial process, you can get a lot of bang for your buck in the first 30 days of a lawsuit just by showing that you're going to be a difficult case to prove and negotiating for whatever terms you can get from the banks. And the banks are very anxious to set up installment plans once they're facing an attorney in a courtroom in a contested matter.
Well, see, one of the things I wanted to point out, at least to my viewers, and I hope you all are listening because this is good information, is if you get a judgment, it sits on your credit report. Now let's talk about that. They've blown it. They did a no-show. They didn't retain you or someone of your qualifications to represent them. And so Capital One smacked a judgment against them. Bam, they're going to go and they're going to pursue collection. They're going to go through garnishment or seizure of assets. And it goes on their credit bureau. Let's talk about that.
Well, let's talk about how it goes on forever.
Oh my God, please.
Yes,
it doesn't end. The devil never goes away.
See, one of the interesting things about credit reporting is that there are statutes of limitations on the amount of time that something can linger on your credit bureau report. And trade items, collections, charge-offs, that all falls in that, as do public records. However, the public record with regard to a judgment can be continually renewed. See, you certify a judgment in the state of Ohio every 5 years. So if you have a 1999 judgment that went on, if every 5 years that they go and they certify that with the clerk, that thing could linger for the rest of your life. And once it's on your credit report, it's really hard to negotiate a discount.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because the creditor, the judgment lien holder at this point, knows that you want it off of there. So unlike the scenario where they don't have their judgment yet and you're arguing in court and they're wondering if they'll be able to get a judgment, once they have that judgment, they know you're trying to buy a house, move on with something, or otherwise are motivated to settle this debt and get out of there. So the price of poker goes up. Instead of 10 or 15 cents on the dollar, they want 90, 95 cents on the dollar.
Plus interest.
Right.
Which has been accumulating.
Interest, charges, attorney
fees, which are accumulating.
Correct.
So literally, you're back in debt slavery.
Yes.
Even though, and I've seen debts that started off with $1,000, they charged it up to the max. And when it was all said and done, that $1,000 was almost $8,000 or $9,000.
I've seen that very example.
And you're like, what the heck? And then they ask me, is this legal? I'm like, yes.
See, and another thing that runs parallel with this is any judgment holder in Ohio can bring in a judgment debtor under subpoena and conduct what is known as a judgment debtor exam. So basically, they can call you into the courthouse, put you under oath, and ask you questions about what you owned, where you own it, and from there they can execute their garnishments and attachments against whatever assets you're compelled under oath to reveal. So on any given day of the week, if you're subject to one of these judgments, you can receive that notice and be dragged into court and reveal, everything about your finances.
For them to come after.
For their picking.
For their picking. You know what? It just seems as if, and I'm in the midst of writing an article right now for publication about debt in slaves, because it just seems as if the American consumer is just like a chicken heading to slaughter, because you don't know the game, you don't know the rules, you don't know the players, but you see an opportunity to buy things, trinkets, without understanding the other side of it. As I tell folks, the advertisement is a screensaver. Don't get twisted here. It's a screensaver, because if you go down that road without being aware of the outcome, you're going to find yourself in a mess. Mm-hmm. So is this why people basically wind up just making minimum payments forever because they don't have enough money?
Well, sadly, and perhaps this is a biased point of view, but I think that the American consumer learns more from their television than they do in the course of their formal education.
I totally agree.
And unfortunately, the television feeds you this image of what you should have. Mm-hmm. Not what you can afford, but what you should have. Mm-hmm. And it goes everywhere from a credit card on its limit to having the latest iPhone issued to walk around and play Pokemon. Right. I mean, back in the old days, I probably sound like this old dinosaur, but frankly, I'm a
dinosaurette.
But we had a course when I was in high school, and it was called Home Economics. Okay. And of course, there wasn't a guy in it, because what home economics was back when I was in high school was teaching young ladies how to bake pies and keep a kitchen. Well, that's probably flown the coop by now. But that term, home economics, is something that I think that the education system ought to grab hold of tooth and nail and change the context of that to what are the economic principles that someone should have in their home.
I like that.
Yes,
I like that.
In that regard, I think that young men and young women in school, particularly in high school, ought to be learning about what is a budget, what is a balance sheet, how much income do I need to support this, what investments make sense over long term, over short term, what do I do if I'm overextended in my debt. Home economics, in my opinion, under the proper title, is something that would really help the American public that is just head over heels in debt, almost to hopelessness at this point.
Well, of concern to me, of great concern, the statistics are absolutely disturbing, Ed. The average person retires with less than $25,000 in savings. Mm-hmm. And people, when they sit down with me and they say, I don't have much money, and I want to tell them, but you did. Mm-hmm. If I look at what you started out with and the hemorrhaging from interest payments and buying cars you couldn't afford and clothing you didn't need and vacations that are just absurd because of your need to feed this thing called your ego. But in the end, when you most need resources, because you're old now, mm-hmm. and I'm there, as I tell folks, I may look good, but I'm not a young woman anymore. But the thought of entering into the most fragile years of your life with nothing and beholden unto everyone to take care of you is frightening when you've had the opportunity over the course of 45 years to save and to be prudent. But, and you may want to speak on this, our system penalizes those of us who are not in the credit market.
Absolutely.
I mean, they do.
Absolutely.
You can't get a house without consistent rent history and 2 to 3 trade lines. Those are FHA and Fannie Mae guidelines. You got to have those. So they want you to show responsible payment of debt rather than saying, well, can we look at your savings pattern? Which to me would be a better measurement of your worth, which is not how much money you're blowing, but how much money are you saving? And I think even when you think about that, that's disturbing. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think you're right. I think that one of the underlying sins of poor economics is instant gratification. You know, if you are looking at a total financial life, patience is one of the most important things. And it operates in two ways that are diametrically opposed. Remember, we were talking about the rule of 72s. For example, the sooner you start contributing money towards your retirement, the more you're going to be able to utilize the rule of 72s in your favor. For example, using that dividing into 72. If you can get, and this is easily achievable, an 8% annual return, then every 8 years you're going to double the principal amount of your investment. So at age 22, you start on this path. Just do how many 8-year segments exist until you're 62 or 65. And you'll just see massive calculations. And just an ordinary savings pattern of $100 a month, compounding at 8% from age 22 is an extraordinary amount of money. Now, in contrast, that same rule, if you make a purchase and you are borrowing money to achieve that purpose, and you are purchasing more than you need, then you are delivering that rule of 78s in reverse to the investor or the financial institution that lends you the money in the first place. So your first house at $75,000 or $90,000, you're borrowing a proportionally smaller amount of money, so you're denying the lender a tremendous yield using that rule of 72s. But if for your first time out of the gate, you put 1% down and you pay private mortgage insurance and you finance a $300,000 house,
Oh, you're done.
You're so far behind the 8 ball that you'll never dig your way out of it.
Well, it's funny you say that because I just was reading in preparation for this article I'm doing that baby boomers, of which we're part of that generation, are retiring with 68% of them have mortgages. And I'm saying to myself, there ain't no way you're going to pay off that mortgage without suffering, because that's money that's gone. And the bank is justifiably making interest on that money. Because if you had the money, you wouldn't be borrowing from the bank. A bank only exists because we say so. I mean, seriously, yes, globally, banks exist because you don't have the money.
Yeah.
But if people could begin to look early in life at these decisions, and you're right, home economics is exactly what is needed today to begin to address this issue of enslavement.
Right.
And it's not based on color, it's not based on race, it's not based on sex, it's based on a green thing called currency, a dollar. And until people can mature to what that looks like, and like you said, instant gratification, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
No, and there's been an entire paradigm switch over the last 15 years or so. And again, I attribute it to the TV. There was a period of time through the early part of the 2000s, prior to 2007, where in essence, the popular mythology was to buy as big a house as you could possibly buy, take a home equity loan for whatever equity might exist in that piece of property, and know in full well that there's not been a decline in property values since the Great Depression in the 30s, and that whatever number of dollars you invest in your real estate, you're just going to reap those profits and cash in someday in the future. Well, basically 2/3 of the American public bought into that model. And then along comes 2008.
2008.
And all of a sudden, your house not only did not increase in value, but in fact was halved in value. So if your entire indebtedness is now 3 times the value of your home, you're in foreclosure. Even if you can manage to scrap out the monthly payments, you're never going to live long enough for it to come back around.
Right.
Right. There are assets that you could invest in that produce yields. Bonds, for example. Real estate is not any such thing. Real estate, it's nice to be putting your money towards your home and building some equity in it, but the fact of the matter is that's expensive money. There's an interest rate on that.
Yeah.
Local taxes,
Right.
school taxes, county taxes, city taxes grow astronomically each and every year, and the cost of insuring that asset, particularly if it's appreciable in value, continues to increase as risks increase. So, for example, and I'm looking at this at my age, I own a couple of pieces of property. I have one in Naples and I have one in northern Kentucky. And the fact of the matter is, without any debt on those properties, it's still $8,000 a month just to carry the scheduled expenses on those properties,
Right.
on taxes and insurance.
Right.
So again, if you buy a bond, you're not contributing anything on that. You're just building a yield that you can cash in on. So people need to be realizing that not everything that you buy that might appreciate someday in value is a true investment. In fact, in the instance of a home, it carries a lot of extraordinary expenses that you need to build into your yield equation if you want to consider it an investment.
Well, as you bring up an awesome observation, and of course, realtors are always quick to say, and banks, oh, a home is a good investment. And I say, you need to crank out the math.
Yeah.
You need, particularly when you look over a lifetime of what monies have been paid to live in that home versus to rent. And talking about a paradigm shift, this may be the time to rent and let somebody else have the headache. I mean, for real.
Well, I think it is short term.
Okay.
But see, I think the arc is going to provide that at some point real estate values will increase.
Yeah.
And so that the landlord is paying more for his property, and as a result of that, the tenant's rents
Right,
will
he's
go up
gotta
and they'll
pay,
be
yeah.
paying more. So I'm not, in fact, I'm a great proponent of people owning the real estate, but I want them to recognize the difference between owning real estate, meaning you have skin in that game, you've made a down payment, you've established equity, as compared to simply having your name on a deed where the bank is owed more money than the property's worth.
Now, would you please say this for the benefit of my viewers, that at death, if there is a mortgage lien against your property, they are going to be satisfied first?
Oh, absolutely. They have a lien.
No, but people tell me all the time, I tell them the house is not yours until there is no lien. And they say, oh no, I own the house. No, the bank owns the home until it's paid off. Is that true or not?
Well, okay, the bank technically does not own the property,
They have a lien.
but your ownership is worthless with the lien on the property. See, there's really some states are what's called lien theory states.
Okay.
Now, in a lien theory state, which is not Ohio, well, actually, Ohio is a lien theory state. So in a lien theory state, you, individual, own the property. You have
Yeah.
a deed of ownership. And then there is a lien, which is an enforceable legal right that's filed against the title to that property equal to the amount of the mortgage plus the charges that accrue from that mortgage. So yes, you are technically the owner, you have a deed, but
However,
your deed is only worth whatever the bank is not going to take from their lien. Now there's other states that are called title theory states. And those are states in which you, the consumer, don't actually get a deed. A trustee for the bank gets the deed to the property. And again, it coincides with the amount of debt that's owed on the property. So they never really have to go through a foreclosure process.
because it's theirs anyway.
Because they don't need the deed.
Right.
They already have it in trust.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, and without naming the bank, because it is a fact, Again, people don't know that you could be paying your mortgage like clockwork, and then on a 30-year mortgage for illustration, and in the 29th year you have a massive heart attack, you become disabled, and you run into problems making your payment. And you have to go into foreclosure because you're not able to make payments. In that situation, even though you've paid perfectly for 29 years, you can lose your home and all the equity accrued in it.
You could, but there's resources out there. I mean, I probably sound very biased on this, but even if you don't call my law office,
You
call
better call
somebody's
somebody.
law office.
Right.
Yeah, because there are, see, first of all, the business ethic that used to exist. I mean, back in the old days, you went down to the corner building and loan, you shook hands with a guy, and he gave you a 75% mortgage for 30 years at 4% fixed. And you came in every month and you made your payment, and then you own the house at the end of term. It's not that way now.
No.
These mortgages are mass produced, they're sold, they're split up, there's securities that are extracted from them, all kinds of things. So that everybody in the lending chain today, at least from the lender's point of view, is interested in maximizing their profit and their return to their investors. So you'll find these extraordinarily abusive situations where some little old lady has tremendous amounts of equity in her real estate. It goes into foreclosure. She's scared to death. The bank grosses up expenses, takes all the equity, and she doesn't know how to make a claim against it.
Right.
So if you're facing one of these situations, you may not know how to convert your equity into cash, but if you call a lawyer who knows what he's doing, he'll tell you how to set up some defenses that make sure that you can redeem what is necessary at that sheriff's sale. If you don't raise those issues, somebody else is going to take it from you.
Well, you bring up an excellent point, and again, as I shared with you earlier, there is, for seniors, and viewers, listen to me carefully because this is important. If you're over the age of 62 and you're facing foreclosure and you do have equity, there is a federal program available right now, but you have to be over the age of 62, and they will pay off that arrearage. They will set up a mandatory real estate tax escrow and hazard insurance escrow, and you can live in your house without making any other mortgage payments. This is on the books. It's been on the books since 2009, okay? So I'm just letting you know that there is help, but as Mr. Garrett said, you gotta deal with people that know what they're doing and that are not out to abuse you. But that program, you have to be over the age of 62. So no, that's a classic case of what I call the absence of business ethics, which has made me in so many cases very disappointed, because both of us came out of that era where there was a personal handshake and you knew the family, you knew who was a good person and who paid their bills, and now everything is systematized, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of answers. I mean, what you're telling me about the credit piece, they get a judgment lien, which millions of people have them, and they're bumped out of the market. Or another example is if you write bad checks or incur charges against your bank, you're blacklisted nationally.
On a private list that you have no access
That
and
you
no
have
remedy.
no access
Yeah.
or remedy.
Right.
All of a sudden, you can't open up a bank account. So where do you do your banking? You do your banking at paydays and check cashing, and there's a whole underground of people who have made mistakes and are literally in survival mode trying to claw their way out of this.
Yeah.
What do you see as the answer, Ed?
Well, sadly, I see nothing more desperate than the nature of consumer banking today. I mean, you'll hear the Washington politicians talk about what great things Dodd-Frank brings about and consumer laws and regulations to protect banking consumers. But all this is produced as an echo to the banks actually influencing the laws that come into play. Some of the most profitable financial institutions in existence today are consumer fee-driven financial institutions that are located in shopping malls and major retailers. And in essence, they're looking for that client that bounces checks.
Oh my
They're
God.
looking for that client that can't cash a check anywhere. And they're just simply picking up these absurd fees with regard to things that banks used to do as a courtesy.
Right.
And they have designed the structure of their entire portfolio of consumer bank services to encourage you to keep digging a deeper and deeper hole. For example, the banks that I'm referring to establish checking accounts that, when presented with overdraft items, will cash such items in the order that creates the greatest number of overdrafts. So and with each one, they'll take their associated fee. So for example, you have $100 in your bank checking account, and by mistake or otherwise, you've written 3 checks. You've written a $25 check, you've written a $75 check, and you've written a $101 check. Now, what the bank will do, they could very easily cash your 25, cash your 75, and bounce the 101.
Right.
But they will purposely present the 101 first, bounce
it, right.
later bounce the 25, and later bounce the 75, and collect 3 overdraft fees from you. Now, again, we were talking about business ethics, but that is where banks are today.
But you know what is so disturbing about that example you've just presented is that those bad check fees aggregate daily until they are resolved.
Right, right.
And so what could turn out to be, I don't know, what is the average bad check fee now? $25?
I think it's twice that.
Twice, oh my God.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
Oh. So if you're accumulating additional charges per diem, then you're looking at what is the interest rate on that particular.
Well, see, the banking industry purposely avoids using the term interest rate. Right, because you know it's worse than Louis the loan shark. They'll call it fees all day long. And the payday loan business is exactly the same way. You know, they talk about fees on payday loans. Well, no, that's actually interest.
Yeah, it is
when a bank collects money on a debt, it's interest. No matter what you call it.
Like what?
Right.
What is your success with this group? Do people run into problems? How can they not run into problems with payday loans?
Well, I actually, the people that go to payday loans are so desperate that they could never pay a retainer to protect their rights. Now, one thing that's interesting is at least in Ohio, payday loans have really had to change their structure over the last 5 years. In essence, they've been driven out by a combination of consumer rights groups together with the banking industry itself. Now, from the point of view of the banking industry, my question is, well, would you make a loan to this person? You know, why are you driving their only access to some type of loan out of business unless you want to make them a personal loan for a week? Well, banks don't want any part of that.
No, they don't want.
But they ran the competition out. Now, there's an end run that the payday loan businesses have done in Ohio in the past several years, which is, in my opinion, tantamount to fraud. What they have done is they've identified that consumer service organizations, of which I own one. I don't do any of this payday loan disguised business that I'm about to refer to, but there is a narrow line within consumer service organization law which provides for extensions of credit. So the payday loans companies have buddied up with what I deem to be illegitimate consumer service organizations and fabricated a loan program under the name of that credit service organization. Now, the nuts and bolts of it are you're serving the desperate people with the intention that they'll never be able to do it. In many cases, they tie it to a title car loan or something along those things. But I guess my point on this is once you're at that degree, once you're swimming in the pool of those sharks, it's too late. You need to be examining your bankruptcy options.
I was going to say, why don't
Right,
we have a show
right.
on bankruptcy?
I would much rather catch
Gosh.
the younger person and teach them that lesson that we were speaking of earlier. Understand your home economics. Understand how much debt you can sustain. Understand how many things can go wrong in your daily life that you wish you had money in your pocket to address. That way, avoid ever having to swim in the shark tank with these usurious organizations. That's what I hope people encompass.
So just kind of to summarize, and I have no problem whatsoever endorsing your company and your services, which I don't do, viewers, for very many people. I have a real tough criteria. But if a person is facing notifications or having debt issues, what is your phone number and how would they contact you?
Sure, just give me a call. And by the way, I monitor and have my telephone calls monitored 24 hours a day,
Excellent.
7 days a week.
Okay.
A lot of times people determine they need my services when the family actually sits down on a Sunday afternoon understanding that Monday is coming tomorrow. So my telephone number is 513-421-8888. And for people that are out of state that are having issues with my credit service organization, that toll-free number is 1-800-267-9902. And when you call through on those lines, you will deal directly with me.
That is so powerful. I need you to say that again, though, for the benefit of those who don't write quickly.
Okay, 513-421-8888 or 1-800-267-9902.
Thank you. Listeners, hear me. This is good stuff. And the reason I say it's good stuff is because the majority of Americans are treading water. And for those of you that don't think there's a way out, there can be. But you need to stop trying to think you know it all, because the financial industry is essentially, we're trained to move against you, not for you. There are a few of us, such as Mr. Garrett and myself, who are committed to helping. But again, we're not churches. We're not nonprofits. We have to be paid. But you know, the reality is, I tell people, is that you're paying every day. You're paying for your credit cards. You're paying for your car that's not paid for. You're paying on a house that's not paid for. And you're paying into a system for which you are a captive. And of course, in the end, some of us do well, but again, the statistics are pretty hard. And they say that the majority of people in their lives with not much because of debt, because of not understanding how the system worked. So I would like to urge you, compel you, if it's not you, you got friends, family, social relationships, people that are faking it because they don't understand how the system works. And I personally am moving on with this home economics idea. I'm trying to partner, and we'll be partnering sometime this year with a school where we will begin to educate our young people on mastering the money game so that they can begin to make the decisions early in their life. Like I was blessed to have parents that taught me very early the positivity of saving and putting money away and all those things that are important in terms of growing up and being mature. It's got to stop somewhere, and it's got to stop now. It really does. It's not just the national debt, which is frightening, but personal debt as well. You will pay to a piper that you don't like, who is not concerned about you and your family, if you do not begin to take the steps. And I do hope that after watching and listening to myself and Mr. Garrett, that you will be prompted to do a hard assessment of your finances and make those decisions. It may be taking a second job. It may be starting a business where you can sell some things to make some income to help you to get out of debt. But whatever you do, make a decision that the buck stops here and it stops now. Take personal responsibility for your stuff and recognize that at the end of the day, nothing matters as much as your being able to be free. And being in debt is just straight out slavery. I want to thank you for sharing your time.
Thank you, Michelle.
I appreciate it. We'll have to sit down and talk again. I will continue to send you business because I think you're outstanding. And let's just hope people got something from today.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And in closing on today's segment of The Power of Money, I'm your host, Michelle Graves, as always, wishing you an awesome and wonderful day. Love your children, kiss your family, and remember that in the end of the day, all you got to look at is yourself in the mirror. God bless you, and I'll see you the next time. You take care.